Well, this famous passage, Advent passage from Isaiah that was read this morning, I sort of want to begin there. And it's a prophecy about the stump of Jesse. Jesse, when you hear the family of Jesse, think a royal family. That from this stump, this thing that once was a great house, a great tree, a great living thing that's been chopped down, that out of that a shoot will be born. There will be a new king and a new line, and this king will set things right. And it won't be like the kingdoms that came before, the many that came before, that were ones of ego and selfishness and violence. But that this kingdom that is coming will be one of the heart, will be one that will be even led by a child, will be one that will set the lion and the lamb to lay together. And this is, of course, the King Jesus who came on Christmas, and it's who we remember. But of course, there's a deeper metaphor as well for us who believe. Today, if you feel like you've been chopped, I think that the greatest reason sometimes we feel like a chopped tree is because we're alone. And very often we've made ourselves alone through pride, ego, and sin. And I want you to stop picturing yourself as a chopped trunk, and rather think of yourself as grafted onto the tree of life, a living tree, who is Christ Himself. And that on that tree, when you're cut, you're never really chopped. You're just a pruned tree. You're a pruned branch. And you're being prepared for something better. I want you to swap those visions of your life, because that is a biblical image that we find in John 15 and other places. Sometimes in life we feel chopped because of tragedy. It's amazing how life can be like a glass house. If it were just left alone, it would remain perfect forever and beautiful. But all it takes is one little stone and the whole thing can come crashing down. Maybe that's how your life was. Maybe you lost a kid or a loved one, or something in your life had some kind of health tragedy or a betrayal or a lawsuit, or something happened where you just, from no fault of your own, just feels like it took years and years and years to build this life, and with just a few careless swings of an axe, your life came crashing down. And you think, I can never go back to where it was. Maybe I'll have something, but it'll never be like that. God will restore the chopped tree. God will restore the chopped tree. There's green shoots coming from your life, and even if it was your fault, isn't it great that we don't live under the blood of pigeons and goats anymore? Isn't it good news that we live under the blood of a living God, Jesus Christ? The blood that replaces and covers the sins and mistakes of our life is the blood of the Creator Himself, who laid down His life that we could be redeemed to Him. All that to say, God cares more about your life than you do. He proved it on the cross. He would do anything for you in the same way a loving father would do anything for his daughter or his son. He loves you, my friend. He loves you. And the last thing we should do is beat ourselves up, push ourselves down, live bogged in shame. God will renew what was chopped down. God will restore what was destroyed. God will rebuild what was undone. He will bring it back in your life. The great program Leading Like Jesus created, it's a little bit cheesy, but it's really easy to remember. They say EGO is an acronym for, and it always precedes failure, it's an acronym for edging God out. Notice it's not pushing or shoving God. It's just like slowly over time. He's in the middle, just edging Him out ever so slightly over time. Just, and then, wow, look at me. Isn't that great? Hey, I'm Bobby. I did it. Look at me. Right? And so what happens when we're stuck in ego edging God out, we're filled with all the won'ts that we won't do for God. I won't love my enemy. I won't forgive my parents. I won't love the person that hates me. I won't take a risk. I won't try and make my marriage work. I won't call my kids. All the things we won't do, huh? For most of us, there is probably a big spiritual won't that is between us and our destiny. And the thing that keeps it there is the ego, edging God out. Aging got out. This is a common theme in the Bible. Over and over you see this happening. You ever read the Old Testament and just go, how do these people always, they see God do this great thing and they always go back to idols and neglect the poor and embrace injustice and just don't, bowing down to all sorts like Baal all the time. Like, what is the deal with Baal? And just always, this type of thing. And what we forget is these stories take place over hundreds of years. It's so easy to forget in 10 years what God did. Imagine 100 years. We see this theme through the scriptures. The book of 1st and 2nd Samuel, first of all, is one book, not two books. The reason it's 1st and 2nd is because the scrolls were too big to haul around. So you have old rabbis trying to haul around these 40, 50-pound scrolls. They cut them in half. I don't know how they picked, but anyway, they did. And so it's really written as the original writer wrote it all in one thing. And it begins with a woman who has an amazing name, the best name in the world. But you can guess what it is. Hannah. It's a good name. Pow, pow, pow. Yeah, Hannah, it's a good name. Hannah begins with this, she's infertile, and in those days, so much of your worth as a woman was having a family. And she's crying out to God for a child. And she says, if you give me a child, I'll dedicate him to you. She's given this child, Samuel, who becomes the prophet Samuel. And she begins with this song. And the song makes three promises that become the theme of all of Samuel and Kings. And it's three things. Number one, God lifts up the humble and lays down the proud. Number two, God wins always despite human evil. Human evil will come, but God will win in the end. And number three, God will raise up a king that will set things right. The king like we read in Isaiah 11. A messianic king to set things right. The first king we see is a guy named Saul. He follows the same arc. Meteoric rise, good looking. He's about my height, 6'3". That came off really weird, especially in the story about ego. Just takes off, does great. And right around the top, when things are at their best, it's the beginning of the end. He starts cracking a little bit mentally, becomes paranoid, totally wrapped up in self-deception and ego. And right at the top of this arc in Saul's life, a new arc is beginning in the life of a young man named David. So we see that Saul's life just sort of crashes down and unravels and falls apart as he tries to control and manipulate everything. It gets worse and worse. And then David comes in the middle of that. He's the youngest of 8 sons, pretty ignored, unwanted. But when he's picked, God says, God doesn't see the way that man sees. He sees the heart. He picks David. David's anointed to be the future king of Israel. And then as a teenager, he goes and kills Goliath, this epic thing. He becomes in the first service I said the organist accidentally. I forget, a minstrel, I guess, for King Saul's court, and becomes a commander and has all these wins. And then Saul becomes insanely jealous and tries to kill David. So young David flees into the desert, and he's always, trying to get away from. He has 2 opportunities to kill Saul. One where Saul is using the restroom, in a cave. He could have killed him right there. In both cases, he has mercy on him. And then when he becomes king, he has this incredible crescendo where he conquers Jerusalem and makes it the capital and unites the 12 tribes. He brings the ark to the temple. He renames Jerusalem Zion, becomes a king of Israel. Amazing story. Just an incredible rise of a king. And then I think it's in 2 Samuel 12, you begin to see it. The chapter begins by saying, and in the season where the king would normally go off to war, he sent out his commanders instead, and he stayed home. Did he stay home to rest? It gives you the impression, I grew up on Hanna-Barbera Bible films, those like cheesy cartoons. They were great when I was a kid. So I always picture David laying on like a cot with like 3 hot Egyptian girls with like palm branches, like keeping him cool, and like some servant with like grapes dropping the grapes in his mouth while he says, "How are my men doing at war?" You know, like this kind of like, you know, that's kind of what I picture in my head. That he's gone from being this giant slaying, amazing man to kind of just resting on, he's an aristocrat, huh? And it's during that time he goes out on his roof. He's kind of bored, probably. He sees a beautiful woman bathing, Bathsheba. He takes her to his room, sleeps with her. She gets pregnant. It's another man's wife. And so, because he's so embarrassed about this, he kills her husband, Uriah, who's one of his own men and one of his friends. Kills a guy to cover up the adultery. Now, how did that happen? The man that had the opportunity to justly kill his enemy Saul twice and has mercy on him is the same man who later kills his friend in an honorless, disgusting, weird way. How does that happen? How does that happen? It's this thing. It's the ego. It's edging God out. Right? That's what happens to us. This weird thing that happens when we start to do well in life or succeed, that we just edge God out. And then we become the worst versions of ourselves. And what you see as the story goes on is the same crash with David, civil war with Absalom, his favorite son, who dies. And then he hands it off to Solomon, who has the same rise and crash. And then the book of Kings has 40 different kings that are mentioned. Only 8 of the 40 are even decently good kings. The other 32 are horrible, and they all follow this thing. The book finishes with the worst king of them all, Manasseh, who's doing like child sacrifice and bringing in idols. There is this promise at the end that someday out of this mess, there will be a king. And that king will set it right. That king will set it right. And that's what this passage is about. Isaiah chapter 11, the stump of Jesse. See, all those kings, almost all of them were in the family of Jesse, huh? They were all related to the king. And they all had promise. They all had meteoric rise. They all got obsessed with ego. They all fell into bureaucracy and aristocracy. They all collapsed. So, what's the message to us? God lifts up the humble and lays low the proud. God will have the victory despite human evil. And God will send a king to set things right. See, and that's who Jesus was, of course. That's what we believe. But you remember what Jesus taught about the kingdom, of all these ideas of the kingdom? We talk about the kingdom all the time. Anytime you talk about government, politics, policy, anytime you talk about the president, the Senate, the republic, proposition, whatever it is, we are talking about a kingdom. And what Jesus taught us was the kingdom is not out there. The kingdom is within. You will never have a good nation made of bad people. You will never have good laws obeyed by bad people. We need new creatures, a new creation, and a new heart. The kingdom is here. And so I'll just finish with this word. If you say today, I feel like I'm a chopped down tree. I'm not what I was before. And you're like David that says, create in me a clean heart, O God. Renew a right spirit in me. Or you just say, you're like this stump. You can tell what it used to be. Used to be strong. Used to be beautiful. But now it's just a symbol of something that used to be. Might be able to count the rings and how many winters it went through. Well, that's about it. And let me say, this is you without the Lord. If you're all by yourself and you're doing it in your own power, this will be you. That's also what the word says. But if we are grafted to the tree of life, which has always been and will always be, even in the coming of the end of the age, that if we're grafted onto the tree of life, who is Jesus Christ, we're not a stump, we're just a pruned tree. Get this image in your head. Just like that. Still ugly, right? Still looks unhealthy, still looks in trouble, but if you know anything about trees, you know this tree's best days are not behind it, but ahead of it, huh? You know that when spring comes, that tree is going to have, it's going to be thick and full of whatever fruit it bears. It's going to be green and beautiful and lush. Begin to see your own life not as a solo life that you're doing by yourself, but see yourself as a pruned branch on the tree of life. If you stay there, you will bear fruit. You will thrive. Don't edge God out of your life. Don't be consumed by ego, but trust in Him. Amen.
Vrienden, welkom bij het YouTube-kanaal van Hour of Power. Hier vind je de interviews die ik mag hebben, inspirerende toespraken van Bobby Schuller en de muziek uit onze uitzendingen. En ik hoop dat de gesprekken die ik mag voeren met bekende en onbekende Nederlanders je ook zullen bemoedigen. Nou, ik nodig je uit om de abonneerknop in te drukken op het YouTube-kanaal en zo met ons in contact te blijven. Tot ziens bij Hour of Power via YouTube.